Hello folks, it's Trailer Reader here with another 10-minute literary review for you. Today we'll be discussing JB Priestley's classic play, An Inspector Calls. Huh? An Inspector Calls? And a classic play, you say? How come I've never heard of it? An excellent question. Let me tell you why. It's because this play is not usually on American required reading lists. It is, however, on many required reading lists internationally, like those that use the GCSE, the IGCSE curriculum based out of Cambridge, England. England? Why should I care about what books they read in England? What? Do you even know what you're talking about? Do you know how many books from England you already read? Great Expectations, Romeo and Juliet, A Tale of Two Cities, Wuthering Heights, and Harry Potter. Yes, in case you forgot, Harry Potter is from England too. And, by the way, An Inspector Calls has another connection with Harry Potter other than being British in its origins. And what connection is that, do you ask? Let me enlighten you. The actor, David Thewlis. You know, the guy who plays Professor Lupin from Harry Potter? Yeah, well, he also plays the titular inspector in the 2015 movie version of An Inspector Calls. Ah, Lumos. And it's not just that. This play is a fantastic, suspenseful read and an excellent commentary on the social ills that face humanity. And if it's not on your school's required reading list, it should be on yours. I have yet to come across a student who has not thoroughly enjoyed this play. So, with that in mind, yes, I know it's not actually a real wand. Yes, I am geek enough to actually own a Harry Potter wand. It's just that my wife won't let me. So let me take a chopstick. Anyway, with that in mind, Accio Novel Basics. Okay, this play was written in 1947 by JB Priestley, as mentioned earlier, and the entirety of the play takes place in the wealthy Birling home in Bromley, England in the year 1912. Now, the setting actually is very, very important, but I'll explain more on that later. The whole play takes place over dinner where Arthur and Sybil Birling are celebrating their daughter Sheila's engagement to Gerald Croft, along with their son Eric. Their festivities are interrupted by a mysterious Inspector Goole who begins to question each of them on their connections to a poor young woman named Eva Smith who, without family and friends, has just committed suicide. At first, the connections seem tenuous, but as Inspector Goole continues his sharp line of inquiry, we begin to discover that each of them had a helping hand in that woman's death. Avada Kedavra! The play begins with a general discussion and congratulations of the upcoming nuptials between Sheila and Gerald. Now, Arthur pulls Gerald privately aside and tells him that his family shouldn't worry, that he's heard he's going to be elevated to knighthood, so that means that Gerald won't be marrying below his station. When everyone is gathered together again, Arthur begins to give advice to his children. One's primary responsibility is to oneself and to one's family. Don't be fooled by all this talk about social responsibility. If you work hard enough, you can advance yourself in life. And with all the scientific and technological breakthroughs that are coming through, like the Titanic, within a generation or two, humanity will be lifted up from poverty and not have to worry about it ever again. Wingardium Leviosa, not Leviosa. Immediately upon saying this, Edna, the maid, comes in and tells Arthur that an inspector has come to the door to ask him some questions. And the inspector, identifies himself as Inspector Goole, which is surprising to Arthur because, being a judge for the local district, he's never heard of this inspector. At any rate, the inspector begins asking questions of each of them in turn about their connections with the death of a young woman named Eva Smith, who has just committed suicide by drinking disinfectant. Throughout the successive interviews, each of the family members reveal in dramatic fashion their connections to Eva Smith. So Inspector Goole begins to unlock the secrets behind the closed doors that this family has regarding the death of Eva Smith. So beware. Spoilers follow. Alohomora! First, Arthur Birling had fired Eva Smith for helping start a strike to make the wages more fair for all the women in his factory. Number 2, Sheila got Ava Smith fired when she was working at a dress shop. Why? Because Ava Smith looked so much better than her in that dress that she liked. Third, Gerald Croft had kept Ava Smith, who was then known as Daisy Renton, as his mistress while he was away on business. And then when it came time to come home back to his Sheila, he decided to let poor Daisy Renton go. Fourth, Sybil Birling had refused Ava Smith when she came to her charity for help, even though she was pregnant, because Ava Smith had the audacity of saying that her name was Mrs. Birling. And she didn't believe Ava Smith's story about a rich son who was stealing from his family to help provide for her. She thought she was a dirty liar and just refused her outright. And fifth, Eric, while in a drunken state, took advantage of Ava Smith and got her pregnant. And when Eric would realize this, he proposed to her, but Ava Smith refused him. She didn't really want anything to do with him, and he gave her money. But then she had to stop giving him money because she realized that in order to help her with her living expenses, Eric was actually stealing from his father's business. So imagine the reveal of this. Sybil has just refused the mother of her own grandchild help. And she committed suicide promptly after that by drinking disinfectant, a very painful and long and horrible way to die. Reducto. Now Inspector Goole, before he leaves, tells them you all had a hand in Ava Smith's death. He said that all of us, human beings, we're interconnected, we're responsible for each other, and if we do not learn our lesson quickly, we will pay the price in blood and fire and anguish. This is where the history knowledge comes in. This is 1912, and what happens just after 1912 in Europe? World War I. As he leaves the room, everyone is standing there in shock and ashamed. Stupefied. But once the inspector leaves, they quickly deduce that all this was a hoax, and they confirm it with 2 phone calls. First is to the police department, who says they've never heard of an Inspector Goole. And the second is the hospital, who say, nah, we have never had any girls commit suicide recently here. Everyone but Sheila and Eric are relieved. They're overjoyed. They did nothing wrong, they think. But Sheila's very disturbed by this. She protests that they've learned nothing from the lessons that Inspector Goole taught them. And even if no one died, they still did those cruel things that really aren't forgivable. But the older Birlings and Gerald, they're ecstatic. They're drinking champagne and celebrating until the phone rings. Arthur picks up the phone. It's the real police. A girl has died. She's committed suicide by drinking disinfectant. And they're sending an inspector over to investigate. Crucio! And so the play ends in a very dramatic fashion that's very satisfactory, but still leaves us wondering, who is this Inspector Goole, and how did he know what happened, and what really is going to take place after this? To really analyze this book, you really got to talk about the themes, but the themes are revealed through 2 primary devices. Number 1, dramatic irony. Number 2, the mystery surrounding Inspector Goole. Now, the theme of this play is really what Inspector Goole says to the whole entire Birling family and Gerald Croft, that we're all responsible for each other, that humanity is interconnected, and that if we don't do something about this, humanity will suffer huge losses. An inspector calls it a clear cry for personal and social responsibility and for social justice. The dramatic irony comes largely from the setting of the play and the proud, boastful words of the elder Birlings and Gerald Croft. Now, the setting of the play is in Bromley, England in 1912, just before the breakout of World War I, which was hugely devastating. And students of history will realize this as Inspector Goole makes his judgment, and it makes it that more powerful and effective and leads to the dramatic irony. The people of the play don't realize World War I is about to break out, but we as the audience should, and it should make us tremble a little bit. Also, at this time, there's still a strong line of demarcation between the social classes, between the noble class, which is Gerald Croft's family, the newly rich, which is Arthur Birling's family, and the poorer classes, like Ava Smith and the maid. Everyone has their own station and place in life with very little movement between them. If you want a clear idea of how this works, check out an episode of Downton Abbey and you'll get a pretty good idea. Now you can see the attitudes of the noble class and the rich through the mouths of Gerald Croft and Arthur and Sybil Birling. They look down on the poor and more worried about their reputations than they are doing right actions and whether they're hurting people. They take very little responsibility for their actions. This is contrasted to Sheila and Eric, who, once they learn of their wrongs, repent. They don't want to be anything like that. And in Sheila and Eric, we get kind of a symbol of hope for the future generations, that maybe the younger generations will cast off the old, wicked, and greedy and selfish ways of the older generations and embrace true social awareness and personal responsibility and social justice. And the most dramatic irony of everything is that the more proud and boastful the words that Arthur Birling and Sybil and Gerald Croft have, the greater their fall when all their sins are revealed. Now, the mystery surrounding Inspector Goole is one of the primary focal points of tension in the story. Who is this guy? Where did he come from? What does he want? And how does he seem to know that things are about to happen before they happen? The death of Ava Smith. Now, a clue is given to us in his very name, Inspector Goole, as like a ghoul or a ghost or a vengeful spirit. Many critics actually agree that Inspector Goole must be Ava Smith's guardian angel or God himself. Either way, the mysteries surrounding Inspector Goole and who he is gives his words an almost supernatural authority. In judging Gerald Croft and Arthur and Sybil Birling and the whole Birling family, he's not just judging them, he's judging all of humanity. Okay, so let's get some reading tips in so we can better work with what we have in this novel to come to some conclusions about it. Tip 1. Do your research. This particular period in British history is very, very important to understanding the social context in which this novel takes place so we can understand JB Priestley's point that he's making. If you don't do your research, you're not going to fully get everything. Now, the Titanic, you shouldn't really do much research for that because you already know what the Titanic is and how that big flop that is and how he's boasting about it. The same kind of things are going to be happening, but also be aware of the social class distinctions as you're going about this, and then I think you'll get a better grip on JB Priestley's point. Number 2, put yourself in Ava Smith's shoes. Now, Ava Smith does not appear once on stage the entire play, but she's the most important person in the play. And so through the Croft and through the Birling's descriptions and interactions with Ava and through Inspector Goole's copy of Ava Smith's diary, they all help paint a picture of who Ava Smith was and what she went through. Just piece those things together and then imagine things from her perspective, and you'll really feel the impact of JB Priestley's message. Number 3, pay attention to the beginning conversations at the start of the play. They're actually very, very important. They seem sort of casual and blah, 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 but actually they set up the reason why the inspector comes to call in the first place. They're the main issues and events and the philosophies and beliefs of the period of that time period, especially among the rich, that are important to discuss. But don't just stop there. See where you fit in their conversation. Now, it seems like some point that Arthur Birling and Gerald Croft make some very good points. And maybe Inspector Goole might be wrong. You need to judge for yourself about that and take a look at their arguments in greater detail. Do Arthur and Gerald actually have a point? Is Inspector Goole the one who is right? Is there any hope for humanity? Or are we all doomed to look despair in the face and die? Expecto Patronum! Well, that's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this edition of the 10-minute literary review of An Inspector Calls. And I hope it inspires you to go read the book for yourselves if you haven't read it already. Listed below are links to other sites that you might find useful in further analyzing this book. And as usual, if you have questions or comments you'd like to ask me about this book specifically, or if you have another book that you'd like me to cover in a future episode, please list them in the comments below. But only positive comments, or I'll Expelliarmus the heck out of your post. Just kidding. As long as you're sincere, you can post whatever you want. And don't forget to subscribe if you like to see more of these kind of videos. And as always, keep reading. This is Trailer Reader, signing off. Knox! Wait, I don't think I just turned off the light. I think I turned off everything. Aw, man. Hey, babe. If Inspector Goole paid a call on us, what crime do you think he'd accuse us of?
Did you cheat on me?
No.
Did you spend more than $50 without telling me?
I plead the fifth.